Αγαπητοί τηλεθεατές, καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ορίσατε στην εκπομπή του Hellenic TV Ομογένεια εδώ Λονδίνο. Απόψε θα σας παρουσιάσουμε τις πιο σημαντικές εκδηλώσεις που έγιναν πρόσφατα στην παροικία του Λονδίνου. Να σας υπενθυμίσουμε ότι οι τηλεθεατές μας από το Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο μπορούν πλέον να παρακολουθούν από το κανάλι 110 στα Freeview την ελληνική τηλεόραση του Λονδίνου, καθώς και το τοπικό κανάλι Hellenic TV1 και ολόκληρη την πλατφόρμα του, που περιλαμβάνει 14 ελληνικά κανάλια από Ελλάδα και Κύπρο, καθώς και πρόσφατες κινηματογραφικές παραγωγές. Επίσης, να σας ενημερώσουμε ότι το Hellenic TV πρωτοπορεί τεχνολογικά και οι τηλεθεατές μας πλέον μπορούν να μας παρακολουθούν από τα κινητά τους τηλέφωνα. Περισσότερες πληροφορίες θα μπορείτε να βρείτε στην ιστοσελίδα www.visiontvnetwork.co.uk. Αν θέλετε να επωφεληθείτε αυτής της μεγάλης ευκαιρίας και να διαφημιστείτε στα Freeview αλλά και στα κινητά μέσα από το Hellenic TV, επικοινωνήστε μαζί μας στο τηλέφωνο 020 8292 7037 ή μέσω της ηλεκτρονικής μας διεύθυνσης info@hellenictv.net. Στο απόψινό μας πρόγραμμα θα δείτε τη συγκέντρωση για την Αμμόχωστο που πραγματοποιήθηκε στο Portcullis στο Westminster από τον Σύνδεσμο Αμμοχώστου Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου και από το Lobby for Cyprus. Επίσης, την διάλεξη που έγινε στο Ελληνικό Κέντρο με θέμα Trojan Women, Performing Post-War Greece, Approaches to Stay, Presentation and Scenography. Τέλος, θα παρακολουθήσετε την τελετή λήξης του 9ου κύκλου διαλέξεων του Ελεύθερου Πανεπιστημίου για την Ομογένεια του Λονδίνου. Ας ξεκινήσουμε με το πρώτο θέμα. Την Πέμπτη 17 Μαΐου, ο Σύνδεσμος Αμμοχώστου Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου και το Lobby for Cyprus πραγματοποίησαν συγκέντρωση για την Αμμόχωστο στο Portcullis-πορτκούλις στο Westminster. Το θέμα της συζήτησης ήταν Famagusta, From Tragedy to Opportunity, δίνοντας περισσότερη έμφαση στο πολυσυζητημένο ζήτημα που αφορά την επιστροφή της Αμμοχώστου στους νόμιμους κατοίκους της. Βασικοί ομιλητές ήταν ο Δήμαρχος της Αμμοχώστου, κ. Αλέξης Γαλανός, ο καθηγητής νομικής από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Hertfordshire, κ. Klearchos Kyriakides, ο καθηγητής Πολιτικής Οικονομίας από το Πανεπιστήμιο Λευκωσίας, κ. Ανδρέας Θεοφάνους και ο ακαδημαϊκός και δικηγόρος για τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα, Mark Stephens. Συντονιστής της συζήτησης ήταν ο Βρετανός βουλευτής David Burrowes. Ας δούμε την έναρξη της εκδήλωσης.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've a few minutes before we start, so I'll get into some housekeeping so that we maximise our time together. Can I welcome everyone to today's meeting, Famagusta, From Tragedy to Opportunity. My name is David Burrowes. I'm Member of Parliament for Enfield Southgate. I'm also the chairman of the Cyprus All-Party Parliamentary Group. This meeting is particularly organised by the Famagusta Association of Great Britain and Lobby for Cyprus, and we're grateful for them for the organisation of today's event. There are a large number of people here. We have a distinguished panel who I'll introduce shortly. We have also some guests, particularly welcome Marina Yakitakoulis, member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for coming. It's excellent to have you with us. We have other parliamentarians. I can see Matthew Offord, a Member of Parliament for Hendon, who's with us, and other parliamentarians will be joining us through today. It's the last day of the Queen's speech, and so there's a number of people who are taking part in that debate in Parliament. But it's excellent to be here. There are a large number of people here. It'd be interesting to know how many Famagustans. Hands up, number of... Fantastic. Well, you're particularly welcome, and that says a lot in itself, that a large number of you are here, and also representing families and generations, and you're extremely welcome particularly, as well as those who are not from Famagusta as well. And I think the context of this debate is to ensure that we hear a number of voices, and so I welcome you all here. If people could turn off their mobile phones so that we're not interrupted by the phone or any other communication systems, and we'll also make sure that we hear from our panel, and then we'll be opening. I want to hear from those who are gathered here, and we want to in this Parliament we welcome free exchange of views, indeed differing views as well, but we also want to ensure that everyone treats everyone with respect and listens to each other carefully, and I'll call you to order if you're not showing those principles of respect, but I'm sure I won't need to do that. But firstly, I'd like to particularly welcome our panel here. I'd like to particularly welcome Alexis Galanos, Mayor of Famagusta. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides, Senior Lecturer in Law. Also welcome Andrέas Θεοφάνους, Professor of Political Economy. And finally, Mark Stevens, who's a well-known human rights lawyer, also very welcome as well. Our speakers could speak for a long time on these subjects, but I've asked them to confine their words to a maximum of 15 minutes, and I'll be holding them to account on that time as we go through, and then we'll be able to have a good time for discussion. So can I first of all invite Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides, Senior Election Law, to open the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Στον κάθε μιλητή δόθηκαν 15 λεπτά για να τοποθετήσει τις θέσεις και τις προτάσεις του σχετικά με το θέμα συζήτησης. Πρώτος μίλησε ο καθηγητής νομικής από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Hertfordshire, Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides. Ας δούμε ένα απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του.
So how on earth is it going to guarantee the Republic of Cyprus? And I've picked up The Guardian, which has a picture of the Acropolis on the front page, and it tells us that governments are preparing for the worst as the massive cost of the likely Greek euro exit emerges. Further afield, the Arab Spring is still unfolding with uncertain implications for Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, and their neighbours. It remains to be seen as to whether the Arab Spring descends into an Islamist winter. In the meantime, it may be no coincidence that with each passing day, the remnants of Christianity in the greater Middle East are being depleted. In the words of the Archbishop of Canterbury, at the present moment, the position of Christians in the region is more vulnerable than it has been for centuries. With this background in mind, I will now try to place the fate of Famagusta into some sort of historical and legal context. Did you know that the distance between the frozen war zone of Famagusta and the active war zone of Homs in Syria is less than the distance between London and Amsterdam? This small detail illustrates a stark juxtaposition. On the one hand, the Republic of Cyprus is legally subject to the same democratic norms, values, and European Union legal framework as the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and other EU partners. Yet on the other hand, the Republic remains geographically and to some extent psychologically part of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Greater Middle East. All of which brings me to my central argument. Since biblical times, a constant theme of the region has been the wielding of raw, unrestrained power, often by European or local governments and their armed forces. A related theme of Eastern Mediterranean and Middle Eastern history has been the forced or constructive expulsion of people from their homes, businesses, and properties. If the book of Exodus provides an insight into these practices in the biblical past, early 20th century history is replete with more recent examples which form the backdrop to what happened to the citizens of Famagusta and other citizens of the Republic of Cyprus of all racial and religious backgrounds. Think of the expulsion of the Armenian and Greek Orthodox Christians from Asia Minor prior to, during, and immediately after 1922. Think of the expulsion of the Turks, the Turkish Muslims, I should say, from Greece following the 1923 Greek-Turkish Convention. Think of the expulsion and extermination of the Jews of Thessaloniki and other parts of Greece during the Second World War. In common with the citizens of Famagusta in 1974 and other Cypriots of all backgrounds, all of these people were at the mercy of a government and its armed forces without any protection from independent courts. Accordingly, all lost their homes, properties, and businesses, if not their title, in the case of the Famagustans, without the due process of law, and worst of all, perhaps, they were all targeted for the very simple reason that they belonged to a particular religion, be it Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or other. Thanks in large part to the United Kingdom, the United Nations responded to the defeat of Hitler by championing the rule of law. Thus, in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, we saw the emergence of the United Nations Charter, the Genocide Convention, the Geneva Conventions, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. These treaties and others were designed to prohibit many of the practices associated with the pre-1945 period. As such, they sought to promote religious tolerance, and protect as well as empower civilians. Needless to say, as Greece is discovering to its cost today, it's one thing to introduce laws and identify values on paper. It's quite another thing as to whether those laws and values are translated and honoured in practice. Turkey is bound by the legal principles and rules embodied within the aforementioned treaties. Nevertheless, when the armed forces of that country invaded the Republic of Cyprus in 1974, they showed scant regard for the law or for the rights of citizens. The primary evidence, among other forms of evidence, lies in the fact that 40,000 or so citizens of Famagusta were driven or constructively ousted from their homes and businesses without any due process of law, and they have been prevented from returning, all because of their religion. By the same token, there were Turkish Cypriot citizens who were herded north of the ceasefire line because of their religion. In combined consequence, Turkey not only occupied the northern areas of the Republic, including Famagusta, Turkey managed to de-Christianize and colonize those areas in violation of the Geneva Conventions, while procuring de facto, though not de jure, partition and religiously based segregation. Greek Cypriots south of the line, Turkish Cypriots north of the line. I'm reminded of the memorable words of the late Dr. Martin Luther King in his letter from Birmingham jail dated 16th of April 1963. Segregation ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful.
Στη συνέχεια, το λόγο πήρε ο καθηγητής Πολιτικής Οικονομίας από το Πανεπιστήμιο Λευκωσίας, κ. Ανδρέας Θεοφάνους. Ακολουθεί απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του.
You may recall, most of you, that following the Turkish invasion in 1974, for those of us who remember the headlines of newspapers in the fall of 1974, many times it was put forward that the return of Famagusta was imminent as a first step towards confidence-building measures between the two communities and as a first fundamental move towards a breakthrough in the Cyprus question. I remember that, I remember that repeatedly. So it was also included in the second high-level agreement in 1979 between President Kyprianou at the time and the Turkish Cypriot leader Rauf Denktaş, that the return of Famagusta would take place with the beginning of negotiations between the two communities. Now, this was put forward repeatedly, but nothing in reality took place. In 1983, following the unilateral declaration of independence by the regime in the north, which was condemned, the UN followed its resolution in 1948, which again called for the return of Famagusta. So there was pressure. And again, following the failure of the attempt under Boutros Ghali to pursue successfully the set of ideas in 1992-93, again we came back with the idea of the issue of Famagusta as part of a CBM package to see how there could be a breakthrough in the Cyprus question. The whole idea was that there would be tangible benefits for all parties involved, and at the same time there would be the creation of the political will to move forward. That was the central idea. Again, following the rejection of the Annan Plan and the deliberations in relation to enhancing Turkey's accession negotiation process, again Famagusta was in the headlines. Now, I would say the following in relation, having mentioned that 3-4 times the issue of Famagusta was brought forward, I would say that traditionally, following 1974, the position of the Greek Cypriot side was that there would be a comprehensive solution to the Cyprus problem. For those of us who speak Greek, they said we should avoid Αμμόχωστο του Κυπριακού, meaning that we should avoid dealing only with Famagusta and forgetting about everything else. At the same time, the Turkish side said, let's take it step by step. They wanted to focus on CBM. But it's important to see, although that they were saying that they wanted CBMs, in reality, they would never honor whatever was agreed. For example, there was an agreement in 1975, an agreement in relation to Carpathia, the Third of Vienna, that the Turkish side never really implemented. And there is something, and there is another something else that we must point out. Although the Turkish side in the 70s, when it was under extreme pressure, they pretended that they would be eager to discuss Famagusta. Nowadays, what do they say? That there would be CBMs, but the fenced city of Famagusta would be returned only within the framework of a comprehensive Cyprus solution. It's very important to keep this in historical perspective and the political implications of this. Now, we saw that on April 23rd, 2003, the Turkish side moved unilaterally to partially lift some of the restrictions to the free movement of people along both sides of the Green Line. That was a step that attracted international attention. The Republic of Cyprus followed a week later with substantive measures, openings towards the Turkish Cypriot community, as community and as individuals, but the impressions at the time were won by the Turkish side, by the side of the Turkish occupation regime. Now, coming back to the issue of Famagusta. Right now, there is in the theory of conflict theory the view that really it's very difficult sometimes after a protracted struggle to have a comprehensive solution to all the problems involved. And sometimes theoretically, the issue put forward is that if it is possible to start with some confidence-building measures and also some mutual steps, then there would be benefits and also the creation of political will so that you move forward in a gradual and evolutionary process towards a comprehensive solution. And I think this today acquires greater importance. Why? We have a new deadlock in the Cyprus question. The Republic of Cyprus is getting ready to assume the presidency of the European Union. There is a roadmap, but it's getting ready. EU-Turkish negotiations, accession negotiations, are not going anywhere. So the issue again, what do we do? It has been put forward again in the press that the Turkish side may be thinking to allow the return of the fence, to allow the inhabitants in the fenced city of Famagusta, but under Turkish Cypriot control. I think that would be very problematic. But let me, before I go to that, try to explain the potential benefits of a proper return of the fenced city of Famagusta, either under the UN auspices or even directly under the Republic of Cyprus. There would be reconstruction, houses, buildings, infrastructure, the sewage system, telecommunications. I think, okay, that at least we would need about 6 billion euros for the initial stages of reconstruction. Where that money would come from? It could come from state money, private money, EU funds, and foreign investment. I think that this would be the first series of spending. Now, this in itself, it would release much higher spending. It would involve job creation for Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. We are going to have the port of Famagusta functioning in a legitimate manner and in a way that it would lead to an expansion of business. And I think the economic benefits of the reconstruction of Famagusta would have a spillover effect throughout the island. I dare say that it would be the beginning of a new economic miracle. I'm talking, you may recall the economic miracle of the reconstruction that took place after '74. I think if we have such a process, it would be a very fundamental big step forward. And it would not be only economic. It would be beyond that. There would be a great political impact. The issue is that understandably, for this to take place, it must take place within a comprehensive CBM, a fundamental CBM package. Perhaps it may involve opening some chapters in the negotiations between EU and Turkey, namely the energy chapter, and also it would be a very fundamental step forward in the beginning of a normalization process in the relation between the Republic of Cyprus.
Ακολουθεί απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του ακαδημαϊκού και δικηγόρου για τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα, Mark Stephens.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to a fellow lawyer and our Member of Parliament sponsoring today, David Burrowes, for this invitation to speak, and also to lobby and to the Famagusta People's Association. I know that David Burrowes shares, as me, neither of us have a dog in this fight, as it were. Neither of us are Cypriot. Neither of us have property in Cyprus or in Famagusta. But I think we share an innate sense of the injustice that has occurred. Now, my role today was really to wrap up and look at the comments made by the various parties. And I'm hoping that Mayor Gallans who must be the only mayor of a foreign-occupied military base and its environs, I'm hoping that you will elucidate for us the political journey and the fundamental human wrong of the displacement by force of a civilian community. Something that really hasn't happened anywhere else in Europe since the Second World War, in East Germany, I think of particularly. Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides rightly reminds us of the history of this appalling human tragedy and the injustice. He also points out the ineffectiveness of the law in getting prompt redress for so many people, and also the fact of the multicultural nature of society now. I also think that Professor Theophanous rightly reminds us at a time of impending economic disaster, as Greece is on the bus out of the euro, as Cyprus is having to intervene to support its third bank, with other countries suffering. At this time, Professor Theophanous, you've rightly pointed up the economic waste of a city in stasis, or as you would have it, deadlocked, a beach that is unreachable to all but a few tin pot generals from the Turkish occupying force, that certainly is unreachable by tourists. It's certainly an economic dead weight is Famagusta. And I think that in human rights and international law, you rightly advert to foreign investment. And it's quite clear to me that nowhere in the world will you have, and there's some very good research being done by Oxford University and the World Bank about inward investment and regeneration, but it won't come from the big sovereign funds of places like Norway, of Singapore, of Kuwait, Qatar, even China or the Soviet Union or former Soviet Russia. It won't come until there is legal certainty. People will not put in money until they are sure that when they put their investment in, A, it is secure, they're going to get proper legal title, what they get they think they can buy, and secondly, they have an effective remedy which is enforceable by proper legal courts within an administration, and that those courts' judgments are going to be reciprocally enforced around the world. And of course, this brings me to the problem that we have, that 38 years ago, on the 20th of July 1974, we have a problem, which is that the invasion led the international community to leave us in a situation where they recognized only one legitimate owner of Cyprus, one lawful sovereign body, and that is the state of Cyprus.
Τελευταίος μίλησε ο δήμαρχος της Αμμοχώστου, κύριος Αλέξης Γαλανός. Ας δούμε ένα απόσπασμα από την ομιλία του.
I'd like to thank the organizers, the Famagusta Association, for keeping the problem of Famagusta alive. And I like you, my friends, that you are here today to listen to us after 38 years, and you still have the patience to dream and have the vision of the return to our town of Famagusta. I have to state that there are 9 refugee towns in Cyprus: Morphou, Kyrenia, Karavas, Lapithos, Lysi, Aganthous, Kythrea, Lefkonikon, and about 180 refugee communities. What distinguishes Famagusta, which is the largest of the lot, it used to be almost the second biggest town in Cyprus before the invasion, and of course the most developing, is the fact that Famagusta is occupied by Turkish military troops. And the only case where there is a mention of Turkish occupation in Cyprus is in Resolution 550 of the Security Council of 1984. Nowhere else there is a clear mention of the Turkish occupation in United Nations resolutions. And this resolution 550 is a binding resolution of the Security Council, which was of course succeeded by another Security Council resolution concerning Famagusta, number 789 of 1992. There has been a failure of international law in Cyprus, particularly in the case of this beautiful town, now a ghost town, a failure of keeping international treaties, a failure of implementation of resolutions, a failure of successive Secretary Generals of the United Nations to do their duty, to keep faith to their mandate. When President Christofias wrote to Ban Ki-moon 3 years ago, requesting him to take steps to return the town of Famagusta as per these 2 resolutions, and before these resolutions, you mentioned it, there was a high-level agreement between Kyprianou Tektash, again referring to Famagusta. Of course, the president did not publish the correspondence. Mr. Ban Ki-moon replied that Famagusta will be given back at the end, with the end of negotiations, at the end of the road with a solution. That was outside his mandate. His mandate said very clearly that he has to implement these resolutions which gave priority of returning immediately the town of Famagusta. But it's also a mistake of the international community and us that we have followed this effort of comprehensive solution, and we have not used the weapon, the tool of legality, to the extent that we should have done. Because at the end, unless you insist on the rule of law and the application of the rule of law and legality, negotiations will bring you nowhere when the other part of the negotiations feels strong enough not to obey with international legality.
Αμέσως μετά το τέλος των ομιλιών, ακολούθησε διάλογος μεταξύ των ομιλητών με το κοινό υπό τη μορφή ερωτήσεων και απαντήσεων. Στην κάμερα του Hellenic TV και στο συνεργάτη μας Κωνσταντίνο Ρουσί μίλησε ο καθηγητής νομικής από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Hertfordshire, Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides.
Okay, so I'm with Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides following the seminar, The Famagusta from Tragedy to Opportunity. And I'd just like you to briefly summarize what you talked about in the seminar.
Yes, thank you. During the seminar, I tried to do 3 things. The first thing was to place the tragic fate of Famagusta into some form of historical and legal context. From biblical times onwards in the Eastern Mediterranean and Greater Middle East, people have been thrown out of their homes purely because of the religion they happen to practice. We've seen that over the centuries with regard to, say, the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, the Greek Orthodox Christians of the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims of Greece who were forced out of Greece after the 1923 Greek-Turkish Convention. We saw this practice adopted when the Germans conducted the Holocaust in Greece during the Second World War. So regrettably, the idea that people can be thrown out of their homes on the basis of their religion is part of the pattern of history in that part of the world. And that was one of the things that I tried to bring across and illustrate. The second thing I tried to do was to explain that in the aftermath of the Second World War, international law developed in a way that sought to prohibit the sort of practices that were undertaken by Hitler, Mussolini and the other dictators of the interwar period and during the Second World War. Alas, those international laws have not operated properly in relation to Famagusta, and as a consequence the occupants of the town and the other property owners of the town have been prevented from returning to their homes purely on the basis of their religion, because they happen to be Greek Orthodox Christians. And the final thing I tried to do was to end on a positive note and call upon a transformation in the way that people think in the Eastern Mediterranean. They have to accept the rule of law, the principle of equality and the idea of non-discrimination. People should be able to operate and conduct their daily lives irrespective of their racial or religious background. You know, for us in this country, it's something that's self-evident. It's something that we accept. And when I talk about this country, I'm referring, of course, to the United Kingdom. Something that we accept. And it's also enshrined in law. And it's the same law in the Republic of Cyprus as it is here. But regrettably, and this is a rather negative concluding thought, the law, as it's set out on paper, is rarely, if ever, applied in practice in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that, incidentally, is one reason why Greece has crashed into the ground over the past few weeks and months. So that, in outline, is what I said to the seminar on Famagusta. The title of the seminar was From Tragedy to Opportunity. Regrettably, for the reasons I've outlined, the tragedy is still there, but the opportunity lies in the future to rebuild the town and the country of which it forms part in a way that is inclusive, democratic, ethical and consistent with the rule of law.
I'd like to thank you for your time, Mr. Kyriakides. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Στην κάμερα του Hellenic TV και στο δημοσιογράφο μας Γιάννη Ιωάννου μίλησε ο καθηγητής Πολιτικής Οικονομίας από το Πανεπιστήμιο Λευκωσίας, κ. Ανδρέας Θεοφάνους.
Κύριε Ανδρέα Θεοφάνους, καλώς ήρθατε στο Λονδίνο. Σήμερα για μια συζήτηση, μια συνάντηση σχετικά με την υπόθεση της Αμμοχώστου. Είστε καθηγητής στο Πανεπιστήμιο Λευκωσίας. Ποιος είναι ο ρόλος σας σχετικά με την υπόθεση αυτή?
Κοιτάξτε, εδώ προσκλήθηκα για να αναφερθώ στη σημασία της επιστροφής της Αμμοχώστου και πώς μπορεί να είναι ευκαιρία αυτό. Διαχρονικά το κυπριακό πρόβλημα αντιμετωπίστηκε με μια σφαιρική ανάλυση, η οποία φαίνεται μέχρι τώρα να μην οδηγεί πουθενά. Ενδεχομένως, εάν προσπαθούσαμε να δούμε και διαδικαστικά μιας εξελικτικής πορείας, η περίπτωση της Αμμοχώστου, η επιστροφή της στους νομίμους κατοίκους της υπό την αιγίδα πρώτα των ΗΠΑ και μετά της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας, στα πλαίσια ενός ευρυτέρου πακέτου μέτρων οικοδόμησης εμπιστοσύνης μεταξύ όλων των εμπλεκομένων μερών, θα μπορούσε να δημιουργήσει νέες ευκαιρίες. Πρώτα απ' όλα οικονομικά ωφέλη, αλλά στην πορεία του χρόνου και ένα πολιτικό κεφάλαιο πάνω στο οποίο θα μπορούσαμε να χτίσουμε για καλύτερες μέρες.
Στην περίπτωση που η Αμμόχωστος επιστραφεί στους νομίμους κατοίκους της, ποια θα είναι τα οικονομικά ωφέλη που θα έχει η Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία?
Εάν επιστραφεί υπό την αιγίδα,
υπό τη διοίκηση τη δικιά μας,
των ΗΠΑ ή απευθείας της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας, ομολογουμένως τα οικονομικά ωφέλη θα είναι τεράστια υπό την έννοια ότι μπορούμε άνετα να μιλήσουμε για ένα νέο οικονομικό θαύμα. Αλλά πρέπει να δούμε το πλαίσιο στο οποίο θα επιστραφεί, τι πολιτικές εμείς μπορούμε να αναπτύξουμε τους ώστε η Τουρκία να πιστεί να προχωρήσει προς αυτή την κατεύθυνση, υλοποιώντας τα σχετικά ψηφίσματα των ΗΠΑ, αλλά ταυτόχρονα και η ίδια να διευκολύνει την ενταξιακή της πορεία. Παρά το γεγονός ότι έστω και τώρα δεν φαίνεται ότι να υπάρχει εκείνο το ενδιαφέρον που υπήρχε παλαιότερα.
Μήπως έχετε να προσθέσουμε κάτι άλλο σχετικά με το θέμα αυτό?
Νομίζω ότι θα πρέπει να προσεγγίσουμε το κυπριακό πρόβλημα με έναν νέο τρόπο, ενώ δεν θα πρέπει να χάνουμε το δάσος, δηλαδή την ουσία του Κυπριακού και το πού θέλουμε να οδηγήσουμε τα πράγματα, δηλαδή προς μια ενοποιητική λειτουργική ομοσπονδία, ταυτόχρονα να αξιολογήσουμε και τη σημασία μιας εξελικτικής διαδικασίας η οποία μπορεί να οδηγήσει σε θετικά αποτελέσματα. Και η περίπτωση της Αμμοχώστου προσφέρεται ως ένα πρώτο στρατηγικό βήμα.
Κύριε Θεοφάνου, ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για τον χρόνο σας.
Εγώ σας ευχαριστώ.
Τέλος, στο Hellenic TV και στον Κωνσταντίνο Ρουσί μίλησε και ο Βρετανός βουλευτής David Burrowes. Ο κύριος Burrowes απάντησε στη σχετική ερώτηση για το ζήτημα της επιστροφής της Αμμοχώστου και μίλησε και για την πρόσφατη επίσκεψη Βρετανών βουλευτών στην κατεχόμενη και ελεύθερη Κύπρο.
So I'm here with David Burrowes, the chairman of the Cyprus All-Party Parliamentary Group. Firstly, I'd just like to ask you, what is your view on Alexis Galanos' point that the United Kingdom has shown neglect to Famagusta and Cyprus?
Well, the reality is that in terms of Famagusta, there is obviously neglect. It's an issue that affects Britain as a guarantor power, and also it should affect anyone who's concerned about human rights. And so, yes, we need to make sure that we do not let any day go past, particularly now that the hope of a solution through the process of talks with the two leaders seems to have been particularly stalled and is effectively over. We need to particularly redouble efforts to make sure that Famagusta is returned to its lawful inhabitants, which is why I, on behalf of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, have written to our Prime Minister to call upon him, I have the letter here, to call upon him to ensure that there is proper attention given to the continued deprivation of human rights, such as property ownership, freedom of movement and settlement of the legal inhabitants of the sealed-off section of Famagusta, and that there's a recognition of the UN resolutions 550, 789, the European Union written declaration, and we called upon the British government, as I do today, and as came through very clearly today, as a guarantor power of Cyprus's independence, to reaffirm most strongly its support for those United Nations Security Council resolutions, and indeed to reflect the fact that the European Union Parliament has also made a similar declaration, and I will be making sure that with other members of Parliament we want to ensure that the issue of Famagusta is right up there as an issue of priority, a human rights issue, a matter that, to guarantee the independence of the island, we need to ensure its return to its lawful inhabitants. And one that we've heard of today has enormous political but economic value, cultural, historical value, that mean it can't just be an issue, a Cypriot issue alone. It's one that we have a responsibility here in the British Parliament to resolve. And that now it can provide that catalyst, that momentum, that through free movement, through movement of people, for respect for the rule of law, and the obligations, international law that have been set down, and to allow the movements in relation to the port being properly open under proper authority, that with all that will be a shot in the arm to resolve the whole issue of Cyprus.
Brilliant. And I recently believe you visited Cyprus, and just like you to talk about your experience, what enlightened you in particular about that, and basically what you found out that you didn't know before.
Yes, it was a really interesting visit. In the context of Cyprus and my previous visits, it was actually a surprisingly positive visit. And I say that because it wasn't just simply us meeting politicians, although we did do that. It was us practically wanting to do something about what I've seen before, which is the wholesale destruction, desecration of churches and cemeteries. And so we visited those churches and cemeteries, and we had hoped to go with well over 100 volunteers, both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, who were enthused by us leading an initiative to clean up those sites. But unfortunately, the Turkish authorities, they did not give that permission, and so we had to cancel those numbers, but we continued to go over there. And with a smaller number, we were able to make contact with people on the ground, local Turkish Cypriots, who themselves don't have an issue, don't have a problem. They don't get involved in the wider political dimensions. They were able to say to us, look, the issue is not a problem of people, the issue is a problem of politics. Obviously, the wider issue is a problem of Turkey and their involvement and occupation, but as far as the people are concerned, there can be a unity over issues of religious and cultural heritage. In fact, we were able to witness and be part of the first cleaning of the interior of a church in Peristorona since the division of the island, and other acts of cleaning up, of the grass being cut, and there may be different motivations of why it's happened and why the authorities suddenly got to do some of that, but at least it shows that practically this matters, and in these times where the political process is stalled, we need to look at more initiatives to build up confidence, to say, no, we don't accept this as a status quo situation, we don't tolerate this destruction and desecration, we want to unite around issues of cultural heritage to try and ensure that we can look forward with hope to a future of a united Ireland.
Brilliant. And I'd just like to summarise, if you will, today's seminar. I mean, what got brought up that you feel an issue that you feel you can take forward from MPs that were in the building, from audience members, previous occupants of Famagusta? Just briefly, just to summarise the seminar and in a way, what stood out for you from today's seminar and how it's progressed in a way?
Well, I mean, what came out of it was that this is a tragedy. There was probably this is the largest gathering in Parliament of Famagustans together to be able to say with one voice that this is an enormous tragedy of historic, of economic, of political, of human rights and cultural proportions, and that came out loud and clear through the panel who came and through the discussion we had. So that's reminded me that as a member of the British Parliament that we shouldn't allow that to be tolerated. It also came out that this is a wider issue that can't just be sort of parked off as a Cypriot issue and can't just be forgotten, and that we need to look at opportunities to raise the issue as an issue of human rights, as an issue that is involved with compliance with international law, and one where we need to try and find ways with a dynamic of the huge cultural heritage which is just sort of simply being frozen and is perishing, of a way just to bring life to that again. And I think the other thing that came across loud and clear is any suggestions that there could be an alternative sort of third way option of a Turkish Cypriot owned solution where Famagustans can return under a Turkish Cypriot authority. Everyone said that is completely unacceptable and has got no legs on it at all, and there must be proper compliance under the authority of the United Nations or as a European area, as the Mayor of Famagusta said. And that's where we need to look to as a creative solution. Obviously, ideally within a comprehensive solution to Cyprus, but we can't wait for that. And no day should go without us pressing for that to happen. So I'm pressing the Prime Minister, and I look forward to a positive response from him.
I'd like to thank you for your time and also what you're doing for Cyprus and Famagusta in order to return the right to the rightful owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all this. Thank you. Cheers.